On Monday the 20th of March 1933, the 32-year-old acting police chief of Munich, Heinrich Himmler, held a press conference. These were his words. On Wednesday, the first concentration camp will be opened near Dachau. It has a capacity of 5,000 persons. Here, all the communist and, as far as is necessary, Reichsbanner and Marxist functionaries who threaten the security of the state will be concentrated, as it is not possible in the long run, if the state apparatus is not to be greatly overstressed, to leave the individual communist functionaries in local court prisons. On the other hand, it's no longer acceptable to set these functionaries free again. Individual experiments made by us have shown that they continue to agitate and attempt to organize. We've taken this measure without regard to petty misgivings, in the conviction that we are thereby bringing peace to the national population and acting in its best interests. Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany on the 30th of January 1933. Only two other Nazis were appointed to the cabinet, Hermann Göring and Wilhelm Frick. The conservatives around President von Hindenburg thus thought that they could control the Nazis as they outnumbered them. However, they were easily outsmarted. At that time, Germany was a federal country. Each individual state had its own rights. On the 27th of February 1933, following the Reichstag fire, the Nazis started arresting their political opponents throughout the country and holding them in makeshift detention centres. On the 9th of March 1933, Franz von Epp was appointed Reich Commissioner in Bavaria by Reich Minister of the Interior Wilhelm Frick, referring to Article 2 of the Reichstag Fire Decree of the 28th of February 1933, which permitted normal constitutional procedures to be bypassed. Among other things, Frick appointed Heinrich Himmler head of the Munich City Police. Himmler immediately set out looking for a suitable detention centre for his political opponents and found it at the disused munitions plant at Dachau. As a munitions plant, it had been located far enough from the local population that they would be safe in the event of an industrial accident, but near enough to the train station to allow the ammunition to be safely transported. The plant closed as a result of the Treaty of Versailles and had been empty ever since. In January 1933, an article had appeared in the press suggesting that the former factory could be turned into a camp for the unemployed, who then could be employed on public works programs. Maybe Himmler or someone who knew him saw the article. In any case, on the 13th of March 1933, Himmler ordered that it be prepared for prisoners. At the beginning of April, Himmler was appointed political advisor to the State Ministry of the Interior. This placed the entire political police in Bavaria under his command, backed up by the threat of Dachau. Thus Himmler gained control and was able to found his own terror apparatus to keep the population in check. The Nazi rulers began the torture and murder of their political and ideological opponents at Dachau almost immediately. In the first 10 months, 22 prisoners fell victim to SS terror in Dachau. Most of them were Jewish, and as a result we can perhaps surmise that they are the first victims of the Holocaust. This is particularly the case as one of the murderers, Robert Espenmüller, the deputy commandant at Dachau, had earlier boasted to an acquaintance that in the next few days he would kill some Jews, as a trial of strength. The number of 22 mightn't appear to be much when compared to the tens of thousands who were later to die, but it happened at a time when murder was still, in theory, a crime in Germany, a crime that needed to be investigated and prosecuted. As everywhere else, deaths had to be reported to the authorities. Just after 9 in the morning on Thursday the 13th of April 1933, Prosecutor Josef Hartinger was in his second-floor office at Prielmeierstraße 5, just off Karlsplatz in central Munich, when he received a call informing him that 4 men had been shot in a failed escape attempt from Dachau. As deputy prosecutor for one of Bavaria's largest jurisdictions, Munich II, Hartinger was responsible for investigating reported crimes from Dachau to the Austrian border. The call to Hartinger that morning was conducted in conformity with paragraph 159 of the Criminal Procedure Code, which required police officers to report immediately to the prosecutor or local magistrate any case in which a person has died from causes other than natural ones. Paragraph 160 in turn obligated the prosecutor or magistrate to take immediate action. As soon as the prosecutor is informed of a suspected criminal act, either through a report or by other means, he is to investigate the matter until he is determined whether an indictment is to be issued. In compliance with paragraph 160, Hartinger called Dr. Moritz Flamm, the Munich II medical examiner who was responsible for conducting post-mortem examinations and autopsies in criminal investigations. The two got into a car and drove to Dachau concentration camp. The camp commandant, Hilmar Wekerle, greeted them and took them to the location of the killings. According to the camp staff, at around 1700 hours the prisoners had been placed under the deputy commandant Robert Espenmüller and given picks and shovels and employed on clearing the forest. They had been particularly lax and needed to be prodded on. When they arrived at the location, 21-year-old medical student Arthur Kahn made a run for it. So did Rudolf Benario and Ernest Goldman. The guards, Hans Berner and Max Schmidt, ordered them to stop. A second warning was given, and then they opened fire. Robert Espenmüller, standing at a distance, also opened fire. The fourth detainee, the 32-year-old Erwin Kahn from Munich, stood in the line of fire and was hit by shots in the face. Robert Espenmüller said that he followed Arthur Kahn some 100 meters into the trees before shooting him down, passing the dead bodies of the other two. Erwin Kahn was only wounded. He died later. The 4 bodies had been dumped in a shed like slain game, as Hartinger later wrote, instead of being treated with the respect due to the dead. Furthermore, when Dr. Flamm knelt to examine the bodies, he could see at once that they'd actually been shot from close range and not at a distance as the camp staff claimed. Hartinger spoke to people in the camp. There's no longer a record of what he was told there, but years later one witness, Willi Gesell, who had been on the same transport as 3 of the victims, said that the camp commandant Hilmar Wekerle had ordered Benario, Kahn and Goldman to step out, presumably as they were the only Jews on the transport, and then had them beaten severely so that they were writhing in agony. When this finished, they were taken to the barracks. Whilst there, SS man Johannes Steinbrenner appeared and ordered them and the 32-year-old Munich businessman Erwin Kahn, another Jew, to empty heavy trash cans with around 30 other detainees. All the time Steinbrenner beat them with an ox whip. In the evening they returned to the barracks, but Steinbrenner turned up there drunk at around 3 in the morning and ordered a roll call. 4 hours later he was back again and ordered the Jewish prisoners Benario, Kahn and Goldman, plus a non-Jewish prisoner, the communist Willi Gesell, to take heavy waste to the gravel pit that was used to dump what was not needed. At around 1400 hours he was back to order the 4 Jewish prisoners to clear part of the forest outside of the wire. Later that afternoon they were taken somewhere outside and murdered. At the time, Hartinger noted the atmosphere of terror. A terrified young man pressed through the crowd. He was sobbing and told me that he was afraid he was going to be murdered. Hartinger tried to calm him down. No one was going to be killed, he said. Then he and Flamm drove back to Munich. On the way, the prosecutor told his colleague that he'd been shocked by the attitude of the camp commandant Himmler Wekele. They also remarked that all 4 of the dead men were Jewish. However, more deaths were reported. On the 16th of May 1933, Dachau camp commandant Himmler Wekele reported the death of the 52-year-old Louis Schlör, of the Jewish faith, a widowed merchant from Gunzendorf in Bamberg district, residing in Nuremberg. The cause of death was suicide by hanging. This photograph is of Louis Schlör. It was in a Nazi propaganda album entitled Jewish Criminals that was presented to Jew-baiting National Socialist Gauleiter Julius Streicher by the head of the Nuremberg police in 1938. I presume it's the same Louis Schlör, as the name is not common, and I find it difficult to believe that 2 people of the same name were sent to Dachau in 1933, although according to the book this Louis Schlör was 46 years old. The album accuses Louis Schlör of having sexually abused German girls, one of Streicher's most favoured slanders against his victims. Why Louis Schlör was picked on, I don't know. Maybe someone in the Nazi apparatus wished to steal from him, or just took a dislike to him. That's a guess, but it's based on experience. The report on the death of Louis Schlör was addressed to the Munich II Public Prosecutor's Office. Himmler Wekele clearly believed that the prosecutors would accept his word that the suicide had occurred without further investigation. This was a mistake. In theory, suspicious deaths like this still required the intervention of the Bavarian judicial authorities. On the evening of the 16th of May 1933, at the request of the Public Prosecutor's Office, a judicial commission went to the concentration camp and inspected the location in Cell 4 where the body was allegedly found hanging. The autopsy report was prepared the next day. District Court Judge Dr. Edward Gunz of the Dachau District Court and Regional Court Physician Dr. Moritz Flamm examined the body for 3 hours and submitted a very detailed autopsy report. The 9 pages with their 76 individual findings left no doubt that Louis Schlör had not hanged himself, but had been brutally beaten to death. The 3 photographs taken by the police at the request of the Public Prosecutor's Office were attached to the report. They show in close-up the horrific injuries of the victim. The originals, like all the extensive files on this murder case, can be found at the archives of the Dachau concentration camp memorial. The head of the Public Prosecutor's Office was the 52-year-old Karl Wintersberger. He reported the case and 3 others to the Bavarian Attorney General on the 22nd of May 1933, and the latter forwarded the report to the Bavarian Ministry of the Interior, adding, "The senior public prosecutor is instructed to discuss the question of further handling of the case with the police commander personally." The police commander was Heinrich Himmler. A few days later, the then first public prosecutor, Josef Hartinger, was walking near the Munich Palace of Justice when he came across the senior public prosecutor, Karl Wintersberger, and ministerial councillor Friedrich Döbig from the Ministry of Justice. Hartinger said that he had the evidence to bring charges against the officials of the Dachau concentration camp. Neither of them responded. On the morning of the 1st of June 1933, Hartinger came across Wintersberger by chance in front of a corridor window in the new courthouse. He announced that charges could now be brought. The indictment was being prepared. To his astonishment, Wintersberger replied, "I won't sign." Perhaps he also added, "You'll have to sign it yourself." Hartinger, speaking later, couldn't remember exactly. That very day at noon, Wintersberger visited Police Commander Heinrich Himmler and reported on the events in the concentration camp. He showed him the photographs of the murder victims. Wintersberger reported this meeting with Himmler to the Minister of Justice. He wrote, "I pointed out that, in particular, the 4 cases mentioned already, based on the results of the previous findings, give rise to the strong suspicion of serious criminal acts by individual members of the camp guards and camp officials, and that the Public Prosecutor's Office is obligated to prosecute the aforementioned incidents. At my request, Police Commander Himmler has promised to give orders that no difficulties whatsoever may be placed in the way of me and the investigating judge in conducting investigations at the Dachau camp. He has declared that, of course, he has no objections to my other plans regarding the investigation of individual cases. Of course, there was no reason for Wintersberger as a public prosecutor not to believe Himmler. However, Himmler had no intention of allowing an investigation and was no doubt only playing for time until he got his thoughts sorted out. The Bavarian Minister of the Interior was Adolf Wagner, another political appointee from March 1933. He was also the Nazi Party Gauleiter. He responded to the prosecutor's letter saying that he had initiated the necessary measures within his area of responsibility. He explained the delay in responding. I'd like to point out that the letter containing the photographs in an open envelope was mailed to the State Ministry of the Interior and went through the normal course of business there until it reached the responsible officer. Hartinger was perplexed by Wintersberger's refusal to sign the document, as his boss usually personally signed every letter. However, this didn't stop Hartinger drafting an indictment. He himself described to his superior after the war how unusual it was. Since some middle and lower officials of the public prosecutor's office did not seem reliable to me, I kept a typist whom I considered impeccable for the time after office hours that evening, the 1st of June 1933, and dictated my requests to her. The next morning, bypassing the normal route, I personally delivered the files to the investigating judge, District Court Judge Dr. Hermann Kiesner, with whom I had already discussed the matter. Since it was not possible to arrest the accused, among them the camp commandant and the camp doctor, by conventional means, I had considered carrying out the arrest with the assistance of the murder department of the Munich police headquarters. Dr. Kiesner immediately went to the police headquarters. As he later informed me, the murder department refused to cooperate and referred him to the political police. He contacted them that same morning, but, as he also told me, was dismissed with a smile. At 2 o'clock that same afternoon, I received a call from the Ministry of Justice and was asked to examine the files immediately and personally. Hartinger's indictment in the Schlör case was initially not only directed against unknown perpetrators for bodily harm resulting in death, but also against 3 people he named. They were the camp commandant Hilmar Wekele, the camp doctor Dr. Werner Nürnberg, and the camp's chief administrator Josef Mutzbauer. Hartinger formulated the facts with stark clarity. The businessman Louis Schlör was beaten so severely by as yet unknown perpetrators, probably members of the Dachau concentration camp guards, that he died on the 16th of May 1933. To fake a suicide, Schlör was subsequently hanged from a hook in his cell using suspenders. Although the accused were aware of the case and were aware of the cause of death, they took no action in disregard of their duties, but rather presented the case to the public prosecutor and the court as if it were a clear suicide. The murder of Louis Schlör was not the only unlawful killing to have taken place in Dachau in May 1933. Hartinger drafted and signed 3 more indictments relating to murders at Dachau that very evening. For murder against SS Sergeant Karl Ehmann, who had shot the Communist Party secretary and protective custody prisoner Leonhard Hausmann while not fleeing as he claimed, but with his service pistol from a distance of 30 centimeters on the 17th of May 1933. The Munich businessman Sebastian Netzwerger was murdered by members of the guards in Dachau on the night of the 25th to 26th of May 1933. Once more, the defendants had also faked a suicide in this case. However, Hartinger could see that the victim had not committed suicide. Nevsky had almost certainly been whipped and strangled by the SS, who had then slashed his wrists with a bread knife to make it look like suicide. Indicted for this murder was Wekele, Dr. Nürnberg and Mutzbauer. Against the SS man Johann Kranzschuster for the murder of the lawyer Dr. Alfred Strauss. Kranzschuster had faked an escape attempt by Strauss, but in reality he'd killed him at close range on the 24th of May 1933 with 2 shots from his pistol. Alfred Strauss was born on the 30th of August 1902 in Munich. He'd been a practicing lawyer in Munich as from 1928. Strauss was taken into protective custody on the 27th of March 1933 for unconscionable professional conduct. The measure was an act of revenge by the new Minister of Justice, Hans Frank, with whom Strauss had had professional clashes in the past. On the 21st of April 1933, the Bavarian political police asked whether Strauss should be held in protective custody any longer, since a criminal offence could not be proven against him. Instead of a release, he was sent on the 11th of May 1933 to the Dachau concentration camp. There he was repeatedly mistreated and finally shot by SS man Johann Kantschuster on the 24th of May 1933. According to the investigating public prosecutor's report, Kantschuster claimed that he was escorting Strauss when he jumped away to get into the bushes about 6 meters away from the track. When he noticed this, he fired 2 shots at the fleeing man from a distance of about 8 meters, whereupon Strauss collapsed dead. The investigation by the public prosecutor's office concluded that Strauss died from cerebral paralysis resulting from a through bone and penetrating bullet wound to the right hemisphere. Furthermore, the autopsy revealed numerous signs of severe abuse, striations in the lumbar and buttocks regions, and bruises on the left abdominal wall. Since Kantschuster's claims that Strauss had attempted to escape were not credible due to the numerous pieces of circumstantial evidence, for example, Strauss was wearing only slippers at the time of his alleged escape, an investigation was initiated against him. The files were transferred from the Ministry of Justice to the Ministry of the Interior. On the 2nd of July 1933, the matter was brought to the attention of Franz Ritter von Epp, former commander of the Royal Bavarian Infantry Life Regiment and head of a noted Freikorps unit which bore his name, and, by 1933, Reich Governor of Bavaria. The files were still available at the time, but were not subsequently returned. On the 9th of July 1933, a Justice Ministry official, Ministerial Councillor Friedrich Döbig, personally spoke with Reinhard Heydrich, who was then handling the affairs of the political police commander in the Bavarian Ministry of the Interior. Döbig noted the following about the files. He, Heydrich, will endeavour to obtain the files. On the 6th of October 1933, Heydrich, in response to further inquiries from the Ministry of Justice, wrote back to them, "The 4 investigation files have not yet been received here. Despite extensive research, nothing could be determined about the whereabouts of the files. However, I will continue the investigation and, if necessary, report immediately." This was untrue. Heydrich knew that the files had been hidden and that the authorities had no intention of permitting an investigation into the murders at Dachau. On the 10th of November 1934, District Court Judge Dr. Sepp, who would later head the Munich Gestapo, was requested to continue the investigation and report on the results. The last memo from the Ministry of Justice dates from the 18th of January 1935. The matter was discussed with the senior public prosecutor at the Munich II District Court. He will again attempt to obtain the 4 missing files with the assistance of District Court Judge Dr. Sepp, who has since been appointed deputy head of the Bavarian Political Police. Whereas Hartinger's charges remained the only ones brought against concentration camp officials by a German prosecutor during the Third Reich, he also attempted to solve other murders at Dachau. The case of the 23-year-old artisan Hugo Hanschuch, who was buried in the Dachau cemetery on the 6th of September 1933, was particularly risky for him. The body had been transported from the concentration camp to the Dachau morgue in a nailed-down coffin. The SS had strictly forbidden the opening of the coffin. Following a complaint from the deceased mother, Hartinger, despite the aforementioned prohibition, arranged for an exhumation and autopsy. This revealed that the death had been caused by excessive mistreatment inflicted on Hanschuch shortly after his arrest on the night of the 23rd of August 1933 at the Brown House in Munich, the Nazi Party headquarters in the Bavarian capital. The powers that be deemed it necessary that the public prosecutors be found other work to do away from Munich. They certainly didn't want them investigating the murders of Jewish German citizens at Dachau concentration camp. Karl Wintersberger was moved to Bamberg, where he became the president of the Senate at the higher regional court. He had been a member of the DNVP before 1933 and joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party in 1937, no doubt a move designed to protect, if not further, his career. Josef Hartinger feared for his life and warned his wife that he could be murdered. However, he was left alive for now. He was transferred to Amberg, where he served as regional court president as from 1936. Although he was probably under Gestapo supervision, he did not forget the murder cases in Dachau and kept notes from these investigations at home, despite the fear of his wife that their house might be searched. Despite the fact that the Nazi authorities had managed to bury the investigations into the murders at Dachau, there was one benefit for the inmates in this concentration camp. The murders stopped. Well, at least temporarily. No doubt orders from above, the anarchy within the camp where the staff could kill anyone they wanted came to an end. And I must stress, this was temporary. In June and July, no one was murdered. Hilmer Wekele was removed as commandant. He was noted for marauding about the camp, always with an ox whip at hand and a huge Rottweiler at his side. He was replaced by Theodor Eicke, who took over on the 26th of June 1933. Eicke was to establish strict rules which were then copied in other camps. In October 1933, guards were given legal immunity for killing prisoners, so there was no longer any risk of them being investigated. In the meantime, the existing documents for murder went missing. The files on the Dachau murders, however, were not lost in the system. They were locked away and hidden. However, they were not all destroyed. 3 of the 4 files were located only after liberation. The files on the murder of attorney Dr. Alfred Strauss were never found. How the finding of these files was to affect the lives of the murderers will be examined in part 2.